Hey, friends, welcome to another interview with the Wonder of Tolkien. My name is Christopher, and I'm so excited to be sharing today's conversation with you. We have a special guest with us, no other than Verlyn Flieger. Verlyn, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I am so excited to get into this conversation. If you don't know Verlyn, I've seen so many interviews where everyone starts out by saying there is no need for introduction to Verlyn, but I want to give some to honor her, and because many of you maybe don't know her as you've started out with this world like I have only a few years ago. She's a renowned scholar and author, best known for her work on Tolkien and mythological studies, and as a professor emerita of English at the University of Maryland, she has made significant contributions to the understanding of fantasy literature, particularly through her analysis of Tolkien's works and the intersection of myth, time, and language. Verlyn's influential works include books such as Splintered Light, which is a treat that you must read, A Question of Time, and many scholarly essays made available in multiple publications and books, and her work co-editing Tolkien's seminal essay on fairy stories. That is amazing. If you haven't read this and the work and the commentary, please do so alongside many other works. The list can go on and on. Verlyn, when you hear people reading off all these accomplishments and books, what goes through your mind? Do you just thinking back? Does this make sense that you had done all this work? Was that in the works and the plans?
It was never in the works. It just kind of happened. It doesn't make sense. I think to myself, did I do that? Did I really write that?
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But in the moment, you're not thinking about thinking. You're just
Yeah.
you're just doing.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
and that is a great pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I would love to know, just starting out, how long? Tell everyone. I think it's just such an honor to be able to have this perspective. How long have you been reading and studying Tolkien?
Um Close to 70 years. I read The Lord of the Rings for the first time when I was 26,
Wow.
and I'm now 91, so you can do the math.
Wow.
It's been a long time.
Wow. Um, that gives you an advantage of a unique perspective because you've sat with the work for so long. Before getting into all that, I know you've shared a little bit on different interviews just how you got into Tolkien, and so you don't have to share the whole story. But I would love to know what initially drew you into studying Tolkien and just getting into it, and then just how has your through 70 years, how has your understanding of his mythology evolved? Like, has it evolved over time, and how has it?
Well, of course it has evolved. Um, nothing, nothing drew me to Tolkien. Somebody lent me the book and said, "You will like this." I was working at the time at the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., and somebody in the catalog department had gotten sent this book by her brother in England. And everybody in the catalog department was reading it and passing it around. And we all read it and talked about it over tea and just discussed how extraordinary it was. And that was my first introduction to it. I loved it, but then I
Wow.
didn't think of doing anything more with it until some years later, years of household duties and maternity leave, and I by that time had three children. And my oldest son got a terrible case of poison ivy that swelled his face like a soccer ball and
Hmm.
closed his eyes. And he couldn't read, he couldn't eat, he couldn't do anything, poor lamb. And so, just on an impulse, I picked up the fellowship and read the first sentence, and he was, of course, hooked.
Wow.
So, all during his recuperation from poison ivy, He was hearing The Lord of the Rings, and then it became a family tradition. And I read it to all three of the kids,
Wow.
before bedtime, after dinner, that kind of thing. And then regularly once a year.
Wow. Wow. So yeah, that is so you basically stumbled into it then. It wasn't a decided choice. Yeah.
No, I knew nothing about it. I'd never heard of Tolkien, as I said.
Wow.
Didn't even know how to pronounce his name. Thought
Some
it had
people still don't. I don't either.
syllables. Um, and- but it was a revelation. It was just, I'd always liked myths and fairy tales,
Yeah.
but I had never read anything like The Lord of the Rings, which
Wow.
was myth and fairy tale all mushed together
Mm,
with a healthy dose of realism.
yeah.
Um, that was just a winning combination, as still
Wow.
it's.
Wow. I love that. Just give us a sketch of from that time to all the books you have written, classes you've taught, essays, and the list goes on and on, interviews, conferences. To this day, how would you say it has, maybe what is the main thing that has evolved or shaped? Is there something that has really shifted over time that just stands out to you in your reading?
Everything. It changed my life. It gave it a direction I had never even dreamed of.
Wow.
When my youngest child started nursery school, preschool, and I had empty rooms in my house, I decided to go back to school. And this was the late 60s and early 70s, a time of great intellectual ferment. And I was lucky enough to be able to teach not the usual English 101, but a course in satire, a genre
Mm,
course.
wow.
And it was going well. And I thought, these students, I bet they would like a course in fantasy.
Wow.
So I proposed it, and it was accepted. And I taught a course that was a kind of survey of fantasy, but it was really just an excuse to teach The Lord of the Rings, which was the whole center of the course.
Wow.
And then it became more and more that over time. And if you're in the academic game, uh, I think certainly then, but even now, the rule is publish or perish.
Wow.
And I didn't want to perish. I was forced to publish. And the only thing I knew to write about was Tolkien.
Wow.
So that's what I did.
Wow. Wow. Publish or perish. That is a harsh
It,
fence to
it,
ride on.
yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. And so you started writing, and I don't think, like you said, if you stumbled upon Tolkien, it probably wasn't a career choice to make it a full-fledged 70-year journey to go through this, but you did, and you started teaching. I just wonder, what was the thing that separated Tolkien's story from other myths to you? Like, what made it stand out compared to everything else you were reading and hearing about?
That's a really difficult question.
Mm,
Um, and it's one I've been asked a lot. I can only answer it partially. One of
sure.
the things that differentiated it from other myths was that this was fiction. This was a whole big long book.
Mm,
I don't think we can discount the fact that quality plays a large part in it. It's a very good book. It
mm,
held up over the years, but it was also a meld of everything that I loved of King Arthur and fairy tales and um, Germanic mythology. I really loved the Nordic myths,
mm,
the Eddas, um, And Tolkien had just taken all of that and built it into a whole secondary world and made it real.
Wow. Wow. I love that. You said earlier about it's myth, but there's a good dose of realism in the story that you can feel. And you've written about this a lot, just how myth, and especially in Splintered Light, how Tolkien talks about myth can help us recover, the sight of this world and see things differently. I would just love to know, maybe for you, how has it done that in your personal life? Like, what has been maybe just a personal, apart from academic, personal takeaway?
I'm not sure I can distinguish
Mm,
the personal from the academic. To me, they are all one. I'm lucky enough
wow.
to have gotten to teach what I loved and found that other students loved it as well.
Wow.
Um, it's all part of the same phenomenon for me.
Mm, mm, yeah. Yeah. So out of all the things you have written and talked about, maybe just what is a theme or an idea that has maybe stood out the most to you, or one of the things that have stood out the most as you have read through, and because your books and your essays cover a large gamut, a large spectrum of the themes in Tolkien and the language and light and myth. Is there something that just stands out on top of your head as you think through those things?
In the book itself, to me, I find it a very sad book,
Mm,
a very dark book, a tragic story, and a heroic one. I
wow.
mean, there's a lot of laughter and good times along the way. I don't mean that it is like a Greek tragedy,
Yeah.
but basically, it's the story of a little guy who had a big job to do and failed. And I find that very moving
Wow.
because we all fail.
Yeah.
We all try. Jobs that are too big for us are what life hands you. Being a parent is too big a job for anybody.
Mm,
Trying to save the world, which Frodo tries to do, is too big a job for anybody, but we all try.
yeah.
We all feel that it's up to us to try to do it.
Mm.
And so we do.
I would love to know. You have explored in your writings how myth retains relevance in the modern world, which is so beautiful. It's one of the power of good stories and myths. Why do you think, among many reasons, Tolkien's myths resonate so deeply, especially with contemporary readers like today, despite all the changes from 75 plus years ago when the books were written? Why do the myths still resonate with us today? What is it about them that make them so relevant?
Well, you talk about them as myths, and that's kind of a loaded word.
Mm,
Let's take it down to stories,
yeah.
just for the time being, and then we could go back up to myths.
Yes. Great.
But remember that Tolkien was writing between the two greatest wars of the 20th century.
Mm,
He started in 1937 and he finished roughly in 1948. So he was writing at a time when the outlook was dark,
wow.
when the world was in danger.
Wow.
And I think that I don't mean that he consciously said, I will write about this, but I think that influenced what he wrote and how he wrote.
Mm, wow.
What do you think?
Wow. Well, this was not part of the deal, was turning the table on me for a little. I mean, we talked a little about earlier how I think for me the main impact has been the way that it has made me see other things in this world in a different light. I think that power has been really impactful for me.
Oh, like what?
Seeing nature, seeing
Look,
adventure,
yes,
seeing courage, kind of seeing all those
yes.
things that he talks so much about in detail and is placed with just freshness in my eyes and perspective. So
Uh-huh.
when I talk about humility, I see it in a different way, or the ennoblement of the small. I see that, and then I see it in the gospel as well, just as I follow Jesus. And so that helps me to see things clearly. But just seeing the beauty of it in real life, there is a deep connection with reality that you mentioned earlier, the
Uh,
realism.
uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find that so intriguing. I would love to know then, let's bring it up a level back to that. How would you explain to folks who are watching this and have never read your works, have never really studied the idea of myth? They've maybe watched some movies or read some books, some fiction. What is it about myth, just in general, maybe even apart from Tolkien's works that you have studied that make them so timeless? What is the power of myth? What does it hold for us?
Well, the power of myth is that it speaks in rather heightened terms about everyday life.
Hmm.
It it speaks about war, about courage, about cowardice, about
Wow.
um, the necessity to fight. I mean, uh, myths reflect humanity. The Iliad opens with Achilles sulking in his tent because somebody took his girl away. That sounds very petty. And yet, as the poet brings us into it, we see that all of these people have been pulled into this terrible war,
Hmm.
almost involuntarily, almost against their will, and they're stuck in it and they have to fight. Well, that's a pretty good definition of war. You get
Wow.
pulled into it, you don't want to do it, you're stuck with it, and you have to fight.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, and we shared earlier how it was impactful for me because I had never read myth or fiction before, and so it was a fresh take. What were maybe some books before Tolkien that you were reading that were impactful before the Lord of the Rings? Was there something that captured your heart that you were loving and kept picking up off the shelf?
Well, I read the Mort Arthur, the story of King Arthur, a great, great tragedy,
Mm,
and just loved it. I
wow.
read the Eddas, the Norse mythologies, the poetic Edda and the prose Edda, which are the stories of the northern worldview, which is very different, as Tolkien points out,
Mm,
from the Greek. Uh, it has a different kind of heroism. It has a bleaker and in many ways less cynical
mm,
attitude toward the world, but it views it as tragic. And Tolkien viewed the world as tragic. Um, as you know, he was a deeply devout Catholic,
mm,
and so he realized that this was a fallen world and that it was going to be imperfect, and that no matter how hard you tried, you were never going to quite make it 100%.
mm. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, you talk about that in your one of the articles you wrote called "The Arch and the Keystone." I want to get to that later. I think it came out in 2019, and it's really helpful the perspective you had. But I was really dying to ask this question, so I hope you have a burning answer to this. It's the only question I have highlighted on my page now, and I think you've written some about this. But as you see, a lot of people talk about Tolkien and a lot of books still come out. I mean, my wife, she no longer asks what is in the Amazon package. She usually just says, "What kind of Tolkien book have you purchased now?" So I need a separate budget line for Tolkien books because there's still so many coming out, which is beautiful. But as you see this, and you don't have to feel like you have to be politically correct. What is maybe one thing you see people greatly misunderstanding about Tolkien and his works that you would love to gently correct as you've studied this? And there's 1,000 takes on Tolkien, but maybe something where you see as you've studied, I think that's an unfair perspective, or that's not the way that it is. Anything that comes to mind?
Yes. And you mentioned the Arch and the Keystone, which I wrote because it was about this.
Wow.
It was something that I really felt was important and needed to be said. Tolkien has two sides. Very simply put, light and dark. He believes in redemption. He believes in loss and failure. His two major essays, which I hope you've read, you, Christopher?
Yes.
The fairy story essay and the Beowulf essay.
I'm reading through Beowulf right now, actually.
Not Beowulf itself, but the essay.
Yeah, on critics and monsters. I haven't read it. Yeah.
In the critics. Well, they're two sides of the same man. The fairy story essay is about the happy ending. It's about what Tolkien, and he invented this word to describe it, called the eucatastrophe, the good catastrophe, the bad thing that at the very last minute turns out to be the good thing.
Wow.
And changes everything so that you go, it's going to be all right. And you have that catch of the breath that he talks about. Wow. The Beowulf essay is about doom. It's about fate. It's about the fact that we're all going to die. And the last sentence in it is not about eucatastrophe. It's about death. The last sentence, and it's only 3 words, until the dragon comes. 4 words.
Wow.
And the dragon is death.
Wow.
So those are 2 things that would be very hard to bring together. And that's what the Keystone does in an arch. It unites what it separates. And that is the 2 sides. Wow. And those were the 2 sides of Tolkien. The happy ending and the dragon.
Wow. Yeah. And you don't see those, as you've seen the works and the essays, you don't see those contradicting each other, but actually...
Oh, they absolutely contradict each other. There's no... and for Tolkien, they contradicted each other. He was deeply conflicted. Remember that this is a guy who lost his father when he was not 4 years old.
Yeah.
Lost his mother when he was 12. Now, that's a terrible time. Any time is bad to lose your mother.
Yeah.
But 12 is particularly bad. Lost his 2 best friends in the war. His life was marked by loss and tragedy.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And so it came out. I remember one time Tolkien in an interview said that I'm not sure if I had the right phrase, the key spring of the Lord of the Rings was death.
Yeah.
Him talking about that. Yeah. And how in the article that you wrote, you did a good job showing both sides because people wanted to paint Tolkien either on one side or the other, and how that helps you understand how, maybe just to someone who is reading for the first time or is going to, I've seen a lot of people from our account online read again, like read for the first time because of it. What would you say to them to help them maybe just understand Tolkien if they're going to jump into it? Would you encourage them with anything before they read?
No, I don't think so. I'd let them experience it.
Yeah.
I don't know what your experience was when I finished The Lord of the Rings for the first time. I had two impulses. One, I cried.
Wow.
Two, I went right back to the beginning and started reading it again.
Wow.
So I didn't want to let go of it.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I feel that. There's something weird about that drew you back because you wanted to be. I feel like if I'm not reading through it, I want to be back in the world. Um,
Yeah, you want to be back in the world. You want to be back with those guys. You want to
yeah.
hang out.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you've hung out with those guys for a long time as you've studied and taught. Yeah, they're your best friends.
For 70 years.
Oh, wow, what a privilege. I heard you say once in a talk that the story of Bilbo Baggins, the story of the Lord of the Rings is the story of Bilbo Baggins and his 700-mile journey on foot to destroy the Ring of Power. And then you paused and you said, and his failure to do so.
I hope I said Frodo and not Bilbo.
Yeah, you might have said Frodo.
Never
Um,
have.
yeah, I wasn't going to correct that, but Tolkien talks about Frodo's failure in like a letter. I think 246. He talks a lot about it. But I would
Yeah.
love to know. Can you just unpack more? I would love to hear from you the significance of Frodo's failure. This is a main character of the story. He goes on this long journey through thousands of pages, and yet he fails to do so. What was the significance of that, and what was Tolkien trying to say to us about life in that?
That we fail. That failure is a part of life.
Mm,
The Lord of the Rings is about loss. It's about losing your home,
mm,
a good chunk of your life, your sense of yourself. And of course, finally, it's about losing the ring,
mm.
which is the biggest loss.
Wow. Yeah.
But life is a series of losses.
Mm,
You grow up. Your children grow up. They move away. The world changes. Look around you right now at what's going on, and you see people experiencing devastating loss. Nothing lasts forever.
mm, mm. Yeah. Yeah. You're gonna make me cry on this interview, Verlyn. so,
Tolkien is going to make you cry.
yeah, yeah. I would love to just take a diversion in that you kind of unpack that even more. You talk in your book about time and about how and there's certain parts in this story where time doesn't move as fast and things stay the same or preserved. Can you just explain that to more? Like how do you see time being used in Tolkien's book?
Well, I'd love to know what part of my book you're quoting.
Yeah, it was in Splintered Light when you talked about it was towards the end of the chapter when you talked about just the kind of parts of the journey that they went on, and you were talking about Frodo being in I think Lothlorien and Galadriel and how the ring.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And that notion that in some sense Lorien is timeless.
Yeah.
Um, well, Tolkien really wanted to work with that because there are fairy tales and modern fantasies in which time stretches so that one instant can take a lifetime,
Mm.
or time compresses and too much happens in too short a time, and it feels like you yourself are being stretched or compressed. In Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, uh, the time between when the children go into the wardrobe, and when they come out, is no time.
Wow. Yeah.
In a sense. They have this whole enormous experience, which has kind of the quality of a dream. And when they come back, they're right where they were. And Tolkien wanted to work with that, but he also was a very honest man, and he realized that he was writing what is essentially a very realistic story, and he couldn't pull a fast one and just say, bang, it happened.
Wow. Yeah.
So he thought about it, and then he thought, no, I can write about how time seems different. And he has that scene where Sam is sitting and counting on his fingers and saying, the moon isn't where it should be because we weren't that long, or we were too long in Lorien country, and
Wow.
and it's not where it ought to be. And the hobbits and Legolas talk about the perception of time passing.
Wow.
And Legolas says time does not tarry ever, but time passes differently
Wow.
in different experiences. And I think Tolkien was reaching for that.
Wow. Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, there, just as you explained that, there is something that comes back alive to me in real experience as you go through moments, right? And time slows down. Time is still passing, but it slows down. So just right back to what you said about the power of Tolkien in the story and how there's so much realism to it, even though this is high fiction, there's a realistic nature to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you feel that.
Well, and there's some earthy realism too. I mean, he talks a lot about hot baths and the smell of mushrooms and the moments of experience
Yeah.
that you can almost taste.
Yeah. 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 You could tell it's written by someone who's lived life, who've had those
You bet.
experiences. Yeah. I want to turn just to some of your works in specific, but in general, just before we get down to some of the quotes I have, I would love to unpack. You've written so many books and essays and are editing a lot. How do you balance? Because earlier you said that the scholarly and the personal are one and the same for you. How do you balance over time the scholarly critique and the personal admiration? How have they, because they're not separate for you, kind of fused together?
Oh, I don't think they're balanced at all. It's not just admiration, it's a kind of awe
Wow.
that somebody could pack that much into a story about going there and back again. You know, that seems so simple. But it's a journey in which Frodo and all of us who walk with him experience what it is to live your life.
Yeah. 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 Wow. So all the things you've written, and as you are writing books, there's deadlines. You feel like that awe is still there. Nothing has snuffed it out. Maybe it only has stirred it up even more.
Oh no, it's gotten deeper.
Wow.
It's a good book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 70 years of reading it. Okay. Maybe you've lost count. How many times have you read through the book, Verlyn?
I have lost count. There was a time, well, when I was teaching it, I read it once a semester.
Wow.
So that's at least twice a year.
Wow.
When my kids were little, I read it to them over and over. I couldn't count. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
Many times I have read it.
Many times. Yeah. Yeah, it's a gift. I'm on my third reading in the last 4 years, and I have found it feels like I'm walking through the world for the first time still.
Yes, it does. And yet you are not. Christina Scull years ago presented a very interesting paper at a very, very early meeting of Tolkien scholars about reading The Lord of the Rings for the second time
Wow.
and what that's like when you know that Strider is Aragorn, when you know that the squinty-eyed stranger with Bill Ferny is up to no good, when you know that Frodo is going to fail.
Wow.
What does that do to how you read the whole thing?
Wow.
And of course, it changes it.
Yeah.
It deepens it to me.
Yeah. 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 Some would say maybe it loses the edge and the surprise if you read it over and over again. But I have not found that to be true. And you haven't found that either. You can still read it and still be moved by it and in awe.
Oh, tremendously.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. That is, you said one time in an interview that when you got done reading it for the first time, you said there was nothing else like this that you had encountered. Do you just remember that moment? What was it, the feeling you had? I mean, it's such a big story, but was there something in your mind that said, this makes it feel like it's not like anything else I've read before?
No, it wasn't nearly that highfalutin. It was just sadness at coming to the end.
Wow.
And the self-indulgence of thinking, I've got to do this again.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I have so many questions about that. But I wanna get to just here. I know we're not supposed to have favorite children. I know that's not helpful. I have two kids of my own.
Many kids you have too?
Yeah, two. I have a 8-year-old son and 12-year-old daughter.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And I know you have three kids.
I had 3 kids,
Yeah.
a son and then a daughter and then another son.
Wow. So we're not choosing kids here, but is there a book, an essay, something of your work that you would say, I love all of it, but if I had to pick one, if I had to rewrite or just go around the country and talk about it or teach a class on it again, is there something that you wrote in particular that you would say, this was just really, really close to my heart and special? I know all of it probably was, but anything that stands out?
I guess Splintered Light, really. The first thing I ever wrote.
Yeah. Yeah. Why that? Why that above everything else?
Partly because it was the first, and it's kind of dear to my heart for that reason, because it made me a scholar.
Wow.
It made me think of myself as a scholar.
Yeah.
And because I got to say some things about a subject that was dear to my heart that I hadn't found anybody else saying.
Wow.
And that I felt were important. So that's a very good thing about the academic game and publish or perish. If you don't perish, you find yourself doing things that you hadn't known you were capable of.
Wow.
And that's a nice surprise.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautifully said. I love that. Yeah. In that book, you talk about the quote, the secondary world can and should redirect our attention to the primary world and through that world to its maker. And I've experienced that in my own reading. You said it should enable us to regain, to recollect what we have always known, but have forgotten how to see. I would just love for you to explain that. What do you mean by that? That we recollect what we have always known, but have forgotten how to see. How would you unpack that?
I think it's because in our everyday lives, we maybe unconsciously enact so much that reminds us of our myths, of our stories, of what we what we truly believe, but don't necessarily consciously invoke. Tolkien once said in the fairy story essay, language is mythology.
Yeah.
Mythology is language. So there's the two halves, and you can play with them. You can put them either way,
Wow.
and they fit. But so much of our language is encoded with mythological reference
Wow.
that we don't even consciously know about. Today is Friday, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know whose day that is?
No.
That's Frigga's day. And Frigga was Odin's wife
Wow.
and the goddess of fertility. In French, it's vendredi, and that's Venus's day.
Wow.
And we say we'll have an appointment on Friday, and we don't even think about what we're really saying.
Wow.
The days of the week are named after gods.
Wow.
If you take your leave of somebody, you can say ciao, you can say see ya, but if you say goodbye, that's a little more serious. And that's because you are saying, God be with you,
Wow.
or adios, adios, adieu. You are invoking the myth of our world.
Wow.
Well, we do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We just are not conscious of it. But the myths are there, whether
Wow.
we are aware of it or not.
Wow. Wow. That I have to go back and now look up every single word that I'm using to make sure that I know where it came from.
Well, it's a good idea. You'd be
Yeah.
surprised at some of them.
Wow. That's beautiful. It's almost like every word and everything we're dealing with is loaded with meaning more than we imagine.
Mythology is language, and language is mythology.
Wow.
You don't have a myth if you don't have the words.
Yeah. Wow.
It's all in the words.
Yeah.
And
It's
for
beautiful.
Tolkien, that was supremely important.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. For those who don't know, the upbringing of Tolkien, or he was a philologist. He loved
Yes.
words, and
Yeah.
that makes it. I think that is probably one of the reasons for me, maybe for you too. It has separated from other stories, is because he was so precise about the words he used, the names and things, to a point maybe other stories weren't as. Or he was creating his own kind of interweaving the story through the languages he created.
Well, he was. When The Lord of the Rings was published, he said, I wrote it to make a world for the languages. And nobody believed him because we didn't really have the languages then.
Wow.
But he realized that there is no language without the world that it describes.
Wow.
And there is no world without the words to tell you what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's so beautiful.
And he knew that.
He
And
did.
he'd been working on the languages since he was 10 or so, or working on language, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's deep rooted. And just like you said, that his death from his family and his friends through the Great War impacted the theme of tragedy throughout the book. His study of language throughout his life up until he published was so impactful because he loved it. He studied it, he breathed it, he wrote it,
Uh-huh.
and so you can feel that in the book, which I think is like a love letter to language.
I think that's great. That's a lovely way to put it, and I think you're absolutely right. And
Yeah.
that's what gives his work the solid basis that I think many of his successors and certainly a lot of his imitators have failed to understand.
Wow. Can you unpack that a little bit more? What do you mean by that? What are they failing to understand that's different than Tolkien in his work?
That it's all part of the same phenomenon and experience, that the world, there is no world without a language to describe it. I've said this, there is no language without a world to describe.
Yeah.
You need words
Yeah.
to tell you what you see, to tell you what you think, to tell you who you're talking to.
Yeah.
And I think that the spin-off from The Lord of the Rings in a particular direction with gaming took one aspect of that and tried to use it to make the whole world.
Wow.
World building is a big deal in games, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it has rules. Well, you can't have a game without rules. But I think that people lose track of what the world building is for.
Wow. Wow. That's profound. Yeah. Yeah. It seems like Tolkien was, instead of someone building a world just to get a story through, and so using it as like a quick vehicle to get the story, Tolkien was as much about creating the world, or the world was the story. Maybe that was the difference instead of everything else.
What's the story? You have said it.
Yeah. Wow. I could talk to you for hours and unpack all this stuff for me. I know I want to honor your time. So just maybe one or two more questions.
Sure.
But I would love to know, as someone there's a lot of people on our channel, on my social media accounts who I still have yet to read the books. They've watched the movies, they've watched Rings of Power and all that is, but they haven't read the books yet. And I would love for you just to, as you share so much about Tolkien, what would you give some reasons for why someone should jump from the movies to the books, and just convince someone, encourage someone, maybe from your personal experience?
That's a tough one. I think to jump from the movies to the books is doing it backwards.
Unfortunately, yeah, a lot of people are in that scenario now.
Because then your expectations are quite different
Yeah.
from what you're going to find, and you may be disappointed
Wow.
because there are no special effects that will just blow your mind away. And I think in the movies at one point, Legolas runs up the trunk of an elk. Wasn't it? But the real problem is that they're two different forms of art, and they have different requirements.
Yeah.
Movies are images. Movies are photographs.
Yeah.
And books are words.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was under that. I didn't get to experience that, thankfully. I had not watched the movies before. And so listening to it helped me to form my own world and let his words shape, right? Like the imagination versus having someone else's view of it, which the movies are a take on the world. And so you're right. It is
Yeah.
there's faithfulness to it, and then expansion, like you said, of Legolas jumping up an elephant. And so, yeah, to let the words shape your imagination from Tolkien himself gives a different kind of perspective to it. I think actually there's more color and wow in the book than the movies because you get so much detail.
It isn't just that. One of the wisest things anybody ever said to me came from a student, and I get a lot of wisdom from students.
Wow.
Um, but we were talking in class right after the movies came out about the differences between them. And one of the students raised um, the notion of Gollum and Andy Serkis, and had he done a good job, and the eyes and the crouching. And another student in my class said, when I read the books, I don't see Gollum. I hear him.
Wow.
And I thought, you just had a very, very profound and wise thing.
Wow.
And what does it come back to? Language.
Hmm.
You know Gollum and you could recognize him anywhere by the
Wow.
way he talks.
Wow. Wow.
And Tolkien, and this is one of his most brilliant manipulations of the power of words, is creating Gollum through his language.
Wow. Yeah. That's
It's
beautiful.
infantile. It's also criminal,
Yeah.
also deeply psychotic.
Yes.
All of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Deeply psychotic. Wow. That's
Yes,
going to
he
be.
is. I. He doesn't know
Wow.
the difference.
Yeah.
What Sam calls slinker and stinker uh, are conveyed to us through the words.
Yeah.
They're
That's so beautiful. Wow. That's beautiful. That gives me a lot to think about as I think about characters and how his own language and the language coming out of each character shapes the character so much.
Well, I personally, while I love Strider, find Aragorn a big bore.
Wow, really?
Yes, I, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Bill's heir, and on and on and on. And Strider, I fell for like a ton of bricks.
Wow. Wow. Oh,
He's clever. He's attractive. He's got a sense of humor. He makes puns. He
wow.
says, "Put your foot in it, didn't you?" Or maybe I should say, "Your finger." But when Aragorn opens his mouth, I shut my ears.
Wow.
And Tolkien knew it because there are times, as in the Houses of Healing,
Yeah.
he has Aragorn revert to being Strider when
Wow.
he's talking to the hobbits.
Wow. Wow. What amazing. Yeah, what amazing way to view through a lens of language. It's so impacted, but it's so underneath it.
Well, and think about what you just said. That phrase, the lens of language. That's
Mm. Mm.
you should write an essay on that.
Yeah, it'll be an essay quoting 90% of Verlyn Flieger's work. um,
That's what we all do.
yeah. No, it's great. Okay, well, I just one last question,
Okay.
it's been such a joy to talk with you, to read your works from afar. As a new Tolkien fan, you have given me new filters and handles and frames to think about the story. So I'm so grateful, and I have many more things to read. I would love to know. You said you're at the young age of 91, so you have a lot of life ahead of you.
I will.
Yes. Is there, maybe there's not. So if there's not, I would love for you just to imagine if you could write one more essay, one more book, and you just had a burning desire to share something else about your time with the stories and Tolkien, what would it be on? Is there anything else you would love to say if you had the chance that you haven't already?
Not as something that I have in my pocket. No. I've spent my life saying things about Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what I'd love to say is he was a very conflicted man.
Wow.
And that conflict is at the heart of his work, and that's what makes it great.
Wow.
And I think I'll quit there while I'm ahead.
That's beautiful. Yeah. For those who haven't read the article, The Arch and the Keystone is a great piece. It's a brief read, but you can get it online, and it's a beautiful just unpacking of what Verlyn just shared about the conflict and the beauty of understanding the story. Verlyn, thank you so much for the time. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for just your 70 plus years of studying Tolkien and sharing it with all of us. Your works are not just scholarly works. I know, they're actually helping people get into a story that could change their life, like it has for you and me. And so, I just think there's so many people grateful for what you're doing, and there will be long beyond all of us, because you are helping people get into a timeless story. And a lot of people need that kind of hope and that encouragement and the joy. And so thank you for all you do. And thank you for being a guest on this show.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I have loved it.
Yeah. Wow. Well,
Very grateful.
thank you, friends. You can find out more from Verlyn and her work. Just Google her name, and all of her works will show up online. And I encourage you, if you have not already, to read some of her essays and books to help you get a deeper understanding and really appreciation for the depth of this story that we all love. There are layers to it that I don't think I'll ever be able to mine, because it keeps going deeper as I read it, and that's the joy of it. And Verlyn has worked hard to unpack some of that for us. So until next time, thank you again for joining us for another interview on the Wonder of Tolkien. We do these because we have a joy of spreading wonder and just from good stories, especially from Tolkien. And we hope that these kind of interviews spark some wonder in you, and that you would also see the world differently because of them. So until next time, thanks for joining us. From Christopher and Verlyn, we're so thankful you hung out with us. See you next time.